And here we are for episode 29.
Right. And where are you right now?
I'm currently in Washington, D.C., which means we're actually in the same time zone for
We are
once.
in the same Eastern time zone, and I'm not up ungodly early. Uh,
Exactly.
mhm,
Or it was equally convenient for us, I suppose. So it's
I suppose, yeah.
9 a.m. Eastern at the moment. Yes,
Mhm.
so I'm just visiting North America at the moment. I've been spending some time in Florida. My wife's family is some of her family live in Florida, and we've been visiting. And we've taken a side trip to Washington D.C. So I've always wanted to go to Washington.
Mhm.
Lived in North America for many years and never made the trip to Washington for one reason or another. And so this time I said, right, we're definitely doing it. And we're here, and it's been absolutely fabulous. Took a walk down the National Mall on our first day. It was really fabulous. I went to the National Air and Space Museum yesterday. We've got a few other things on the Natural History Museum today. So loving it. And I actually don't mind the cold weather. I mean, I lived in Canada, so I don't mind cold weather, and I actually kind of finding it a bit refreshing actually to be able to. I've got this great jacket that I basically never get to wear because it's never cold enough in where I live in Australia, so
Sure.
get to wear that. Yep.
Yeah, well, in Florida is basically the place where it's not usually cold enough, but sometimes it does get that way. So,
Right. I think I made a point of wearing my jacket a couple of times while I was in Florida. It wasn't probably that necessary. No, it hasn't been that cold. So, but in Australia, of course, it's summer at the moment, so we're
mhm.
quite happy to miss a lot of the heat too. So that's a nice sort of. I believe also too there's some flooding, not in the part of Australia I live in, but I read last night there's some flooding going on. But unfortunately, that's part of the course for Australia.
I see. Right. Right. So, any other things did you actually kind of see in DC that are kind of outstanding or something that's past your expectations, I suppose.
Well, yes, the National Air and Space, excuse me, the National Air and Space Museum is amazing. I actually didn't realize they had the original Wright Flyer there in the museum. So I mean, as soon as I saw it, of course, that makes sense. But yeah, that was just amazing to see. For me too, the particularly the most exciting bit was the space, like the Apollo capsule and the Gemini capsule and a Mercury capsule they've got there, that sort of thing. I absolutely love a number of satellites even that they had there. They had a couple of backup satellites that had, obviously not the ones that were launched, but a couple of backup satellites that had been put there. Yeah, so that sort of thing was just absolutely fabulous. I've previously been to the Kennedy Space Center too, so but I've
Yeah,
got a bit of an interest in space science and so forth.
astronomy and such. Yeah, yeah. I've been
Astronomy,
to yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I've been to the Kennedy Space Center too, and yeah, ever since I was a kid, uh, I've been pretty interested in the planets and like astronomical objects and such. Mostly, I learned by looking at the pictures, and the illustrations are always fabulous, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yes, and the National Mall, it's I knew it'd be big, but it really is big. We walked from one end to the other. Well, I walked from the Capitol building to the Lincoln Memorial, and yeah, it's quite a walk. And then we actually walked back part way as well. So, but yeah, absolutely enormous and fabulous. So yeah, we're having a great time in Washington.
What's next for you?
So yeah, the Natural History Museum today.
Mhm.
I'm also going to go to the Holocaust Memorial today, and we went out to Arlington National Cemetery briefly yesterday as well. There were just one or two items and one or two places there I wanted to have a look at. I didn't realize that the old Lee House, Robert E. Lee's house, was actually open. We actually arrived a little bit late to in the day. It was sort of just the last thing we did. We arrived a little bit late in the day to see inside, but yeah, if I get an opportunity, I'll go back and look inside the house as well. So yes, we're sort of being real tourists at the moment.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're basically, are you based for the vacation at least in Florida, or are you just visiting Florida?
You just we're in Florida with my in-laws for a
Sure.
few weeks.
Hmm. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
All right, so let's talk about stuff you got lined up here. So you had some things you want. Did you want to talk about the stuff you got first, or did you kind of want to?
Yeah, well, I had one item, which is just the number of sites, number of feminist sites that have been disappearing from the internet over the last few years.
Hmm.
I do have a short list, but there's one that people may not remember as much because it disappeared a few years ago. It was actually I checked it was actually 2016, and I'm going to make sure it gets a Wiki for Men article.
Hmm.
XO Jane. It was a bit of a strange name, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm afraid when I think of that, there's actually a genetic condition, XO, where a person only has one X chromosome, I think. So I always thought that was a bit of a strange
Oh.
name. I always thought it was a bit of a strange name. But anyway, XO Jane, it was wrapped into some other site and I think pretty much disappeared a few years ago. Daily Life is a site you might not have heard of. It was an Australian feminist site.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing happened. It was run by a commercial organization, a large news organization. It was wrapped into another site, and that kind of means the content disappears, I think, really. So Jezebel, of course, uh, ran into financial problems recently, and I think they laid off all the staff. Somebody has apparently purchased Jezebel in the last few weeks, last couple of weeks.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But the fact that they ran into such serious problems, I think, is telling. And of course, the last one is We Hunted the Mammoth, which of course is a very anti-men's rights side, and not only an anti-men's rights side, an anti-manosphere side, and so forth. But that ran out of steam, went offline, as we've said before, and is currently just a maintenance page there. Originally, when it went offline, David Fitzgerald, who runs it, said that he was going to leave the site up into sort of an archive mode and maybe make an occasional post. So all the content should have been visible. But for the last month or two, it's been in maintenance. So that may be the end of the site. It's unclear whether we'll ever see that again.
Interest
But
in feminism kind of waning off here, or
I think so, and of course, there's the problem over within feminism of the split as a result of the trans movement. I think that's but really weakened feminism, and that's a position we've talked about it before, and I think that's something that's widely recognised in the men's rights movement at the moment. But feminism, I think, has been severely weakened by the rise of the trans movement and the fact that feminists can't agree on whether they should or what they should do, whether they should support trans women or oppose them. Of course, as the TERFs do.
absolutely, yep. But I'm not going to rest on my laurels just yet. I think the feminists are going to get some support really soon, and it's going to come from the traditional gynocentrists. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Call me a pessimist, but I think
No,
that they're going to be helping each other out a lot in the coming future.
yeah, and I think we've already seen a bit of it perhaps, but I think you're probably right. It's probably going to get a lot more than it has. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely, because they've got the manosphere, what they call the manosphere, to unite against, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
they've got the potential to go full Nazi on us here.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And yes, that is something we should be prepared for. Absolutely.
Hmm. Right. Speaking of,
Yes.
they like to call the our red pill sphere. Calling what they call this the modern red pill, as if they never had a problem before with the red pill. They keep using the term modern red pill,
Mm.
right? So was it good before? Did they recognize the benefits of the red pill before, or and it's now just completely Andrew Tate right now, or or
I
you
don't
know what I
remember
mean,
them.
right? Like,
I don't remember them ever being supportive of it before.
yeah,
I mean, before the rise of people like Andrew Tate, I don't. Yes, I don't recall them ever saying that the red pill was a good thing before. So I think there may be some revisionist history going on there, perhaps.
oh yeah, sure. And sadly, some of it's the fault of the PUAs. They kind of hype themselves up this way. You've got your Andrew Drain Johnsons calling themselves president of the manosphere, and we've got Rollo Tomasi calling himself godfather of the red pill. He even called
Yeah,
himself father of the red pill, which
yeah.
I don't think this fits the bill here.
I agree.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But back to my point, the traditional gynocentrists love to kind of latch onto this lower tier version, bastardization of the
Mm.
red pill, and then say that it's just the men's version of feminism.
Yeah.
So, they want to work with feminists sometimes more than we ever would consider,
Yeah.
and they have the gall to call us the male version of feminism.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've in response to this sort of claim, I've made a list of items that will be appearing as an article in Wiki for Men. It hasn't yet, but I have a fairly substantial number of items on the list, I think, which counter this argument. So I don't know if I could perhaps go through them and we could comment on them.
We
Jump
have
in.
to.
Feel free to. Yep, sounds good.
Yeah,
Just
we
feel
gotta
free
do
to
it. We gotta do it.
feel free to jump in. Okay. So the first one, and now this list is currently not ordered. So this is it's just a working draft I've got at the moment. The MRM clearly sets out its goals. Feminism is nebulous in its claims. Feminism has become somewhat, and this is a comment that I've got here. Feminism has become somewhat less nebulous since 2015, which has actually made it easier for MRAs to target their claims. So the first bit, of course, is that we tend to be very clear in our goals. We talk about, if you look at the ICMI, you see a series of issues that we're talking about, a voice for men and so forth, and a wiki for men, of course, to have lists of issues. But one thing I will say is I think that the feminism has kind of lost its knack of being evasive since about 2015. Now that's my feeling, and they've become easier to target. But that's an aside. But the core idea there is that the distinction is that we're very clear in our goals, and they're not.
Absolutely.
So the next one, MRM clearly defines terms. Feminism tends to avoid definitions or use only nebulous definitions. So this is somewhat related to the previous one too. We tend to, if you look, there's a glossary on A Voice for Men, there's a glossary on Wiki for Men, a larger glossary on Wiki for Men. Other sites too tend to be very clear about what we mean. Feminism tends to be very nebulous. This leads to concepts like what some people call Schrodinger's feminism, where feminists you can't nail them down on a particular idea, whether or not they want their idea, which way they want the idea to go would depend on what is most convenient for them at the moment. Are women strong? Are women perpetual victims? So
Yeah.
which one of those things is true?
Exactly.
And of course, it will depend on which argument they're making at that particular time.
Right. This non-falsifiable is the thing, right? Isn't
Right.
it's basically you can't really, it's everything and nothing all at once. So you can't really pin
Absolutely.
it down, right?
Absolutely.
They have no goalpost.
So some people say Schrodinger's feminist, but I prefer an alternative term, feminist superposition, which makes a reference to an actual term in quantum mechanics, superposition, where a particle actually you don't know what state it's in until you try to interact with it. So,
Yeah.
but it's probably a bit more nerdy, it's a bit more technically correct, but I like it. So I call it feminist superposition.
Mhm.
And the next one, feminists actively oppose the existence of men's groups on university campuses and elsewhere. The reverse is not true. I think that's pretty self-evident that we often have trouble organizing groups and so forth, and then we get attacked. Well, we have no problem with them having their groups, even groups that we don't agree with, and the groups that are hostile. We're not trying to shut them down.
Right. Yeah, in
So,
fact, it's good that we let them do it because they will let their idiocy speak for themselves.
absolutely. And I've always said the most powerful words we have are feminist own words. Yeah, exactly. Aside from the free speech argument of not shutting down feminists by virtue of their right to free speech, as well as that, just let them keep talking because honestly, they reveal their own idiocy in many cases.
Exactly.
Feminists actively disrupt men's rights meetings and men's group meetings. The reverse is not true. It's similar. It's related to the previous one, where they try to shut us down and don't accept. They don't embrace free speech, but we do. Feminists insist that men's problems should be addressed through feminism. The reverse is not true. That, of course, was famously stated by Big Red at an event in 2012. Excuse me, which I believe was a presentation by Warren Farrell. And yeah, it's something that feminism has said a lot, but obviously she was very vocal about it. But they claim that we should simply not attempt to address men's problems because feminists are sorting it out, which obviously they aren't.
Exactly. Yep. Well, one thing though, I mean, that's kind of reminding me of this thing. Like, we've got some traditional conservative types that are formerly MRA, but have gone on record saying that they're not. Certain
Yes.
people saying that religion covers this kind of thing.
Yep. And
Like say Christianity covers men's issues and so forth, and that's why that they've broken off from the men's movement. And this kind of reminds me of, I think that's the parallel here.
Yeah, and that actually raises a really good point that feminists have often tried to claim. Occasionally we see something like, "Oh, I'm a former men's rights activist," and they'll get this, they'll get an article in a publication, and they'll claim to now have embraced feminism. I'm not really aware of anybody who's gone from men's rights. There's lots of people who go from feminism to men's rights. I'm not really aware of anybody who's gone from men's rights to feminism. I suppose there might be the odd individual
Not
who has.
feminist. Yeah.
No, exactly. As you say, and on a related topic, um, more recently, the feminists have tried to claim that men's rights is a gateway to white supremacism, for example. Again, I don't think the evidence supports that. Rather, what we have been seeing, as you said, was when people do leave men's rights, they tend to go to religion, actually. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Now, that's not to say that everybody who's embraced religion is rejecting men's rights, because there are a number of people who have become more religious. I know who are still supporting men's rights. But you're right, there are people who are who have embraced religion and explicitly reject men's rights. No names, but I'm sure we know
Uh,
who we're
yeah,
talking
we
about.
know exactly who these people are.
Yeah,
I want to say that they're mostly women, but I think there are men too that
yeah,
do this. Yeah.
exactly. I think
Yeah,
you're
sure.
probably right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It could be that the women are more vocal about it, perhaps, but I think there are
Yeah.
probably men as well.
Well,
Absolutely.
uh, the women are very, it's really understandable that they would do this kind of stuff because they know that gynocentric solace that they would have because they've been probably doing the whole independent thing to some extent while they were in MRA, but
Yeah,
they're finding this kind of perverted solace in like being cared for and being less accountable under that protection from the traditional way of men as such. And as you know, I'm not for any one way of man, of course, and I certainly don't think that men should be beholden to just being protector and provider. They should have their own lives to lead, and frankly, women should stop being parasites and just and actually coexist if they are with men as independent entities and be honest about it, be accountable about it. That is a whole rant in itself, but I'll stop myself.
yeah. I mean, that's right. Traditionalism is gone, okay, and I don't think it's coming back. The traditionalism we're talking about, the male provider and so forth. We have to find a new way forward, and I think you're right. I think that sort of a reciprocity, a cooperative approach, is the way we have to go. I was going to make a comment about religion too. And this is something I'm not religious, but I have looked into this topic, and a number of other people have too. And Christianity has become very, very gynocentric. And I know at
Mhm.
least, yep, and I know at least one red pill person who has embraced Christianity, who is very openly saying this as well.
Yeah.
And yep, and it's amazing, absolutely extraordinary. Because I think if you read the Bible, it makes a number of comments about like, I mean, it's obviously a traditional approach with male authority and so forth, but that's not at all what modern Christianity is about. It's actually, I should say, even more than it's embraced feminism to a large degree as well. So which is quite extraordinary, I think,
Right. Yeah.
considering.
Yeah. You know that meme of whoever has an opinion and there's like a bunch of swords surrounding him and guns and such.
Oh, I think so. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
I totally don't feel that way right now because I think there's clearly a lot of religious people in our movement, and
Yeah,
I'm it's not I'm not trying to fight that at all. If anything, religion should fall under the category of philosophical discussion. We should be able to
yeah,
discuss this kind of stuff openly and in an intellectual way
yeah.
instead of just expecting that we have to adhere to this one particular religion and you have to face under some kind of charges of heresy and so forth and charges of blasphemy if you think otherwise. So
Exactly.
ex-
Freedom of religion. And freedom of religion includes, of course, the right not to be religious.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's right.
Mhm.
Now, having said all that, there are some people in our movement who are religious and have been religious for a long time and probably a little bit traditional because of that, but they're still
Mhm.
quite reasonable about it and so forth. So it takes all types.
Right.
Some people are a bit over the top about it, but there are other people who are obviously more traditional, but
Exactly.
they're reasonable about it, and they're
Right.
able to, yeah,
Yeah.
they're
And
accepting of different viewpoints.
yeah, theism and atheism are not the good and evil marker that I think too
Mm.
many kind of painted. It's how people kind of apply their beliefs that I'm really more concerned about. It's not your belief or disbelief in God that makes you a good person.
Yeah,
That is, and that's the way. And I had to say this. Sadly, I don't think this is something that most people see eye to eye with. I think if you're with God, you're the good person in these people in these people's eyes, you know. And you know, if you're atheist, you have no morals. With you know, confusing it with nihilism,
and of
of
course it's
course,
more complicated than that. Exactly.
way
Yeah.
more complicated.
Yeah, and that comes down again to freedom of speech, freedom of, and tolerance, freedom
Right.
of religion and tolerance. So, and this, of course, is of what we're aiming for, a tolerant, pluralistic society, and what I think, unfortunately, a lot of forces are pushing back against now, led by feminism and other woke groups, where they're very intolerant and they're demanding of orthodoxy, and they won't accept alternative viewpoints.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, I think I've derailed this long enough. What were some other
Right.
things on the list?
Right. So my next, no, that was a good discussion. My next point, feminists insist that DV, I've actually got DV, IPV. To those who don't know, DV is domestic violence and IPV is intimate partner violence. I often write it together. Technically, a lot of what people refer to as DV is actually, when people are talking about DV, they're often talking about intimate partner violence. Domestic violence is a broader category among any people who are living together or related. It can be very broad. So I've written here: feminists insist that DV/IPV is almost exclusively men being violent towards women. MRAs argue that both men and women can be perpetrators and victims of DV/IPV. So I think that is one of the big differences. They refuse to accept the data. Well, we're saying no, men can be violent and women can be violent. In actual fact, to a large degree, the rates are the same. When it comes to non-reciprocal violence, there's actually some evidence that women are a little bit more likely to be violent. But women are also more likely to suffer more serious injuries in general. So, which, by the way, as I've said before, is one of the reasons why I think feminists should be recognizing reciprocal violence, because it ends up building up to a point where people start, it elevates, people get injured, and the person who suffers the more serious injury is more likely to be the woman. And as a result, if I think if feminists really cared about women, they'd recognize reciprocal partner violence and try to address the problem.
Right.
But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. But yeah, that's the argument essentially that we recognise that say both men and women can be violent. Feminists argue it's overwhelmingly men that are violent.
Exactly.
Yep. Feminists want to stop violence against women. MRAs want to reduce violence against everyone. Stopping violence. I also want to add, I've got a few points here, editorial points, I suppose. Stopping violence is an impractical goal without changing the human condition. So what I'm saying here is essentially feminists want to stop domestic violence. So we want to stop violence against women. Okay, that's their argument. They say they want to stop, or they want to end domestic violence. Okay, we want to reduce violence against everybody. But my argument is that it's not possible to end violence, and you will never end domestic violence, unfortunately,
Right.
without changing the human condition. And yet, that is exactly what they call for. So, essentially, yeah, we're wanting to reduce violence against everybody, but I think we also recognise that you'll never completely eliminate violence, unfortunately.
Right. Well, no, you're not prepared for violence if you don't expect it, basically. So there's two sides to this thing. Of course,
Mm.
you know, in normal situations, you know, you kind of, you know, this person will never do that. They'll be kind of trusting, and then they're not prepared for that violence. But then take into account that women are really not expected to commit violence, and
Yeah,
so you know, and men end up as being complete beating sticks, or the receiving end of the beating.
yeah.
Right, right, and you know they're supposed to kind of shut up about it here. You know, it's just
Yeah, you're probably right. A lot of men are probably completely blindsided when that happens, because they've been brought up to believe that such a thing would never occur, that women would never be violent towards them, and
mhm.
then they discover that the woman can be very violent towards them, and they're probably, I think, excuse me,
Mhm.
a lot of men have trouble dealing with that, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, right. So next one is feminism insists in the responsibility. It's the responsibility of men to stop domestic violence, whereas MRAs argue in general it's the responsibility rests with everybody, essentially. I guess it's almost a rephrasing of the previous one, but we do see, particularly in Australia, actually, we see ads, commercials of the government will actually run commercials saying violence, stop it at the start. And what they're arguing is that men learn to be violent to boys, essentially learn to be violent to girls early in life and then carry that on, which is, I think, patently ridiculous. If you look at how young boys treat young girls and go and through life and how men in general treat women, I think the reverse is true. That men tend to give special treatment to women, which of course is a form of gynocentrism, as part of gynocentrism. But most men are strictly averse to being violent to women and will step in if another man is violent towards women. So the idea that
or is said to be violent towards them.
Exactly, that's right. Sometimes he's not even being violent. That's right. It may be a false claim, false accusation, and they will still step in. Absolutely. I think that this runs counter to all observation and common sense, and it's absolutely extraordinary that the Australian government would run ads like these commercials, but they do. I mean, I've heard the argument. I haven't researched this as much as I want to, but I've actually heard the argument that if a person becomes is violent in their adulthood, they generally learnt that violence before the age of 5. And if that's true, then the argument is that most of them actually picked up the violence from their mother, because in general, mothers are more influential in those early years for a variety of reasons. They spend more, in general, women spend more time with their children and so forth. So the argument has been put forward that if you see, say, violent men who are violent to women later on in life, that they acquired that characteristic, they learnt that violence before they were 5, and quite possibly from their mother. So I think that really the government and the wider society needs to step back and have a good look at these issues and realize where this violence is really coming from.
Yeah.
Feminists normally avoid reading men's rights sites and books, describing it as a hate movement. And this is a convenient rationalization to allow them to avoid having their preconceived notions challenged.
Right.
In contrast, most MRAs regularly read feminist sites and books. So this is about knowledge and so forth. And I often describe feminists as being willfully ignorant. They deliberately avoid reading information. I actually mentioned on Twitter recently, I think this puts them at a permanent disadvantage to us, that they don't understand us, and so they can't really target our arguments very well. We understand them very well, and we can understand, we target them. We target them effectively. A related topic too, I just want to clarify: A Voice for Men was listed as a hate site by the Southern Poverty Law Centre. It's not anymore. Quietly in 2022, they removed it after I took over, and that was their stated reason. I believe I did mention it in a previous episode. But interestingly enough, yes, A Voice for Men is no longer listed as a hate site. So, but more broad, go on.
But all it took for them to list it was a satire article, right?
Exactly. A couple of articles. Exactly. That's right. That's right. I think they realized, my view is that the Southern Poverty Law Centre realized that they'd made a mistake by listing AVFM as a hate site. They'd overstepped their bounds, and they removed it because I took over. They gave them an excuse essentially to remove it. Having said that, they have gone on to list XY Crew as a hate site, which is interesting because XY Crew is just about men getting together and talking about issues and basically, shooting the breeze and whatnot. So it's absolutely extraordinary. And there's very little information about XY Crew unlike, say, A Voice for Men, where you've got a site. There's not a lot of information on XY Crew online. It's not publishing articles or anything. So seems very strange to me that they would take this path and list it as a hate site, but that's exactly what they've done. Yes, next one is actually something we mentioned previously. MRAs are committed to free speech. Feminists most definitely are not. Feminism is very much authoritarian and seeks to shut down alternative viewpoints and demand orthodoxy.
Right. Yeah. And I wish the libertarians would understand this. Stop inviting feminists into your circles. They're not here to be libertarian. They're going to metastasize their feminist authoritarian ideology and call it libertarian, and that is not a good thing.
No.
Wake up here.
feminism has a tendency to enter other movements and then try to take them over.
Mm,
I've argued that they've so demonized us they can't do it to us. They've tried, by the way. They have tried to enter our groups and so forth, but because they've demonized us so much, they can't get wider support from the feminist movement, from rank and file feminists, to try to enter men's rights and try to take it over and extinguish it as they have, or control it as they have with so many other movements.
right.
But I've argued for a long time that we're effectively immune to that because the reason we're immune to it is because they demonized us so much.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly libertarianism, the skeptics movement, even movements like open source, they've all seen in the last 20 years feminists come in, demand a seat at the table, and then once they have a seat at the table, demand change and demand everything be accommodated and everything change to suit their needs and their ideology.
Mm-hmm.
This is a common thing, unfortunately, and it's a shame that libertarians are falling for this as well,
They are.
because feminism is tied up with postmodernism. So postmodernism is a concept. It's a strangely named concept, but I think, but it's essentially argues that truth is subjective and there is no objective reality and so forth. And and you'll hear feminists talk about my truth or your truth. So
Mm-hmm.
we make an argument. I make an argument, and I present PASC or something as supporting domestic and inter-partner violence, and they say, "Well, that's your truth." And they're able to dismiss that because of the mental tools that postmodernism gives them. So yeah, feminism is very much tied up with postmodernism. There are feminists that aren't postmodern, but the majority of them are.
Right. And I admit that some of us in the men's movement like seeing how postmodernism causes the feminists to eat themselves up here with the trans movement and so there's some Schadenfreude, but
There is, exactly. You're absolutely right. Yeah, when we saw the split in feminism and that's exactly, and they ended up with basically what amounted to a civil war. I admit a few of us were sitting back eating popcorn for a while,
exactly.
enjoying the show. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but of course, then the traditional gynocentrists say that, well, then we support postmodernism. The men's movement supports the postmodernism. This is what they say. The
Yeah,
trans movement is a men's rights movement. It's the
yes.
traditional gynocentrists joining up with some of the anti-trans feminists that are saying this. You know,
It's feminism that argued that gender was a social construct for 50 years. The
right,
trans movement is a logical next step from that. I don't know why they were surprised it happened.
right, yeah,
Yeah. So it didn't come from us. Yes,
hmm,
it actually grew out of feminism. Absolutely.
right,
So yeah, this comes. We've talked about this one a little bit already. Feminism is intolerant of alternative viewpoints. The men's rights movement embraces diversity of thought and accepts alternative viewpoints, which of course comes back to the free speech, but it's not just free speech. It's also
sure,
embracing
yeah.
diversity of thought.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah, sure. And
And
this includes the arguments. We can
mm,
actually, yeah, you're right. It's not just about saying, this is not the subjectivist approach in which, you've
yeah,
got your truth, I've got mine.
yeah,
But that's not the case. We banter this thing out, of course, but
absolutely.
we just accept that it happens to exist. I personally might think that some viewpoints still absolutely do not belong in the men's movement, and likewise, they'll probably think the same of me. But here we are being diverse in that
Absolutely.
respect.
And you'll even see this in the pages of A Voice for Men. There are articles that would disagree with each other. In fact, some people have had some
Mhm.
debates in articles and
Yeah,
so forth. And there are some times where the article is actually quite divergent from A Voice for Men's position, and we publish it anyway. We put a little caveat at the front and say we don't necessarily agree with this, but we think this person should have an opportunity to present their argument, and by all means, fight it out in the comments. Yeah, absolutely, it's about diversity of thought and giving people an opportunity to address and look at different ideas. And it comes back to meritocracy in that regard too. The market, what's called the marketplace of ideas. Present the idea, put the idea out there,
yeah.
and see if it stands on its merits.
Mhm. Yep.
Yep.
Hmm.
Next one is when selecting leaders, feminism selects for extremists, while the men's rights movement selects against it. In feminism, feminists percolate to the top of feminism. In feminism, sorry, extremists percolate to the top of feminism.
Hmm.
So this is one I've often mentioned too, that there are extremists in all movements. The question is how you deal with them. And we tend to shove them to the side, while feminism has a very bad habit of letting them rise to the top,
Hmm.
unfortunately. And
Yep.
if anyone doesn't believe me, just go and look at the many feminist leaders over the last few decades. We've got plenty of information on Wiki for Men about many of these women.
This strikes me as kind of like a combination of how belligerent an extremist can get, plus the subjectivism and postmodernism that permits it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. A lot
yeah,
of these
that's
ideas are tied up, and they assist each other. Absolutely,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah. They basically let the extremists float to the top.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. It's quite extraordinary. And then sort of just openly deny it, where you've got women calling for men to be castrated in some, or for the population, the proportion of the population of the male to be reduced to 10%, and all sorts of absolutely extreme ideas. And yes. Next one, the men's rights movement is comprised of a small group of dedicated activists. Feminism is enormous, but most have little or nothing to do with feminism day to day. So I think this is an important difference too, that there really aren't very many uh, uh, people who will certainly call themselves MRAs, and most of us know each other, and we tend to be quite active and dedicated. Feminism, on the other hand, there are a lot of people who call themselves feminism who have nothing to do with feminism day to day. As I said, I came up with something called the feminism test a few years ago, where basically I can ask a feminist a series of questions, and by how they answer it based on their involvement with feminism, I'll tell you what sort of feminists they are. I'll tell you what, right. So, and basically what it amounts to is if someone is inactive in feminism, they're probably what could be called an equity feminist, as Christina Hoff Sommers would say. If they're active in feminism, they're probably a gender feminist, which means they've got more extreme views. And this goes back to the point about leaders being extreme in feminism.
Right. Exactly. And I'm not letting any of these off the hook. Not the equity
No,
feminists. I'm not letting them off the
I
hook
agree.
because feminism is based, there is no feminism without patriarchy theory. There is
Yeah.
no feminism without that the idea that men have once been their women's oppressors.
And even many moderate feminists tend to believe that. Absolutely, they do. Yes, yes.
Non-feminists believe
Yeah.
this.
Yes, that's absolutely, you're absolutely right. That's right. Like to say the feminist historical narrative is so pervasive that even many non-feminists, even some anti-feminists, believe it.
Hmm.
Actually, absolutely.
Right.
And the large number of what you could call moderate feminists, because they're not extreme, they're not trying to harm men directly. They give feminism an air of legitimacy it doesn't deserve.
Exactly. And they're all the more smug when they need to be because of it.
Yes, they are absolutely.
Right.
So feminism tends to have opaque and shifting goals. This again comes back to some of the earlier points. The MRM clearly states its goals. I guess that's somewhat of a repeat. As I said, this is an unordered list and rough notes,
Mhm.
but yeah, essentially what we were talking about earlier, that feminism tends to be quite opaque and shifts its position as required. Although, as I said, I think it's not as good at that as it used to be. But the MRM, we clearly state our goals. The Voice for Men has clear objectives
Excuse me.
stated there, and as well as obviously we've got specific issues we're talking about.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Next one, MRAs tend to be well informed about feminism, or the reverse is not true. Well, a little bit of repetition there. So,
Yeah.
yep, yep. Feminism tends to be based on lies, half truths, and exaggerations. The MRM aims to stand on a solid body of evidence. So it's interesting here that often the reverse is the claim is often made of the reverse. So feminism often claims that we are not that we're just making it up as we go along, and we're lying and so forth. And we say, look, here's all our evidence. Well, let's go through it together, right? I say, let's go through it together right now. It's fun to watch them sort of squirm out of that. Some of the less experienced feminists will let themselves get into a position where they're actually presented with evidence, and then they find all sorts of inventive ways of squirming out of it. One of my favorites was I was talking to an Australian feminist, and I showed her PASC, which is the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge project, which is the largest meta-analysis of DV and IPV research that's ever been undertaken. And she refused to look at it because it wasn't Australian data, which I thought was I mean, it's obviously just an excuse not to have her ideas confronted. But I pointed out that PASC actually includes Australian research. It's mostly research from the Anglosphere, but it does include studies right across the world. And it was just an excuse. Another one, a good one I actually saw with a feminist was she refused to look at the data because it was in the wrong format, which I thought was great. She wanted something in PDF. I'm not kidding. She wanted something in PDF, and because it wasn't in PDF, she refused to look at it. So again, that's an extremely weak argument, and obviously someone who's just trying to avoid having their ideas confronted.
Hmm.
In contrast, feminists do send me information, and I actually look at it. And so far, I haven't yet to see any feminists send me any information that's worth anything, quite frankly. And if there's any feminists watching this, and you think you can send me information that will show that my arguments are wrong, do it. My email address is on A Voice for Men. You can send it to me anytime. Uh, I've had feminists send me information, which was one from this organization called in Australia called Our Watch. It's just yet another feminist organization enjoying the gravy train of domestic violence funding. And she said, "Oh, I've got this argument, I've got this, video I'd like you to watch." I said, "No problem, I'll watch it." And it was a fluff piece. All it did was just make a whole bunch of whole wild claims, and I carefully watched and didn't see a single cited source in the entire video about it. It was probably about 8 minutes or something like that. That's just one example, but other examples that have been said similar information. It's ridiculous. They make these wild claims and claim this sort of thing as evidence. It isn't. As I repeat, if any feminist can send me any solid evidence to show that my arguments are wrong, by all means do so. Or if you think it's solid evidence, by all means do so, because I do look at the material I've sent.
Too much of it is basically this person said it, so it's evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
As long as I agree with
Basically,
it.
in the case I was mentioning, essentially Our Watch said this was true, thus it was true, was the argument. I suppose it in some ways perhaps was a circular argument. Uh, Right. I think last item in my list. Despite changing fashions, feminism tends to be leviathan and unable to structurally change. In contrast, the men's rights movement is nimble. This is evident in response of each of these movements to the trans movement. So basically, feminism. It's interesting because feminism actually, and this is actually another one I actually don't have on the list. I probably should. Feminism tends to have fashions. Do you know what trigger warnings? Trigger warnings, a few years ago, you couldn't go to any feminist site without a trigger warning. You really couldn't,
Mm,
right? And then you watch a feminist video, oh, trigger warning at the beginning, right? We hunted the
yeah.
mammoth, right? Okay, you will occasionally hear the term now, but not really.
Right.
It's gone.
Sometimes it's satirical, like it's half-hearted. Your trigger warning,
Yeah.
for
Uh,
the idiots.
But
Yeah.
I'm talking about people who are yeah, but probably more these days. I'm talking about serious trigger warnings, which
Yeah.
say 8 or 9 years ago, feminism would not. It was all over the place. There are plenty of other examples like that. They have, and we have them on Wiki for Men. They have particular check your privilege is another one. Check your
Mm,
privilege was something that 10 years ago you would have heard all the time. Now you don't hear it. Feminism tends to have a lot of fashions, and they fade in and out every 3 to 5 years. We in contrast tend to stay focused to what we're doing. But despite that, feminism is Leviathan. And when a genuine change occurred, the rise of the trans movement, they found themselves unable to adapt. And
mm,
in the end, and they've essentially been split, rendered asunder by this.
mm,
Uh, and they're still having a great deal of trouble dealing with it. In contrast, the men's rights movement is nimble, and we looked at this. Said, okay, there's this rising movement, and it's harming feminism. Let's look at it. So my position, by the way, and I've said before, is that I oppose transitioning of children. I'm happy for adults to make the choices for their own lives. I may think at a personal level, I think my transitioning is probably done in some cases where perhaps it shouldn't be done, and I think that some people are getting bad advice from doctors and the
yeah.
medical fraternity. But
Mm,
at the end of the day, like an adult choosing circumcision, an adult man choosing circumcision, it's their choice. That comes back to that freedom to choose. It's their choice. I may say, I think you're making a mistake, but
yep.
if you do it, it's your choice, and you get to own the consequences. But
Yep.
children, I oppose transitioning children. So
Exactly.
anyway, yeah. So that's the position. That's the official position we talk in A Voice for Men. Uh, in contrast, feminism has obviously been unable to adapt and is essentially in what amounts to a civil war at the moment.
Right. Well, I want to add to this list here that the men's movement has end goals, and feminism. See, it can't adapt,
Yes.
but it keeps finding ways to perpetuate itself.
Yeah.
it's a blob basically. It's just
That is a very good point. That's right. It must, and in fact, insofar as it may have addressed issues in the past, once it found that those issues were addressed, it had to find new issues in order to perpetuate the gravy train. Absolutely,
yes, yeah.
yeah. I mean, excuse me. I think, excuse me, feminism still claims credit for a lot of things it didn't do. But having said that, even if we concede that it may have addressed some issues in the past, they have to invent new issues now in order to try to find a reason to continue to exist. And this is something, of course, that is not unique to feminism. There are other movements that do this too, and there are other organizations that do this too. But yeah, we have specified end goals, and I've said if we can reach a point where I believe the objectives of the men's rights movement have largely been achieved, I will happily sit back and say, okay, great, I'll retire from activism. We've done it. But yeah, feminists to a large degree don't do that. And a related concept, of course, there's no money in men's rights, and that partly protects us from that. Perhaps there's no money in men's rights. There's unlikely to ever be a lot of money in men's rights. So because people don't like people don't like generally giving money to men's organizations to a large degree. Even if we end up with some money coming in, it'll never be a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The ones that are somewhat successful kind of indulge in gynocentrism anyway. So
Yeah, that's right. I agree. So that's all I have on my list.
yeah.
I don't know if did you have anything else for today's meeting?
No, I think I spilled all the beans here. Yes.
Yes, I think we covered it well. I think that sounds good. Coming up, I think on just a little bit under an hour. So I think
Yeah, that's good.
it's been a good episode.
That is
So
good. Yeah.
thank you very much. And I think I'll still be in North America at the next one, I think. But
Let's see. Yeah.
yep, great. All right. I'll
Very
talk
cool.
to you soon.
Sounds good. Talk to you then. All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.